Yeah, handsome guy, by the way. It's usually not my thing, but he is a good-looking sucker.
Yes, folks, left reckoning. 233 Trump's plan to starve America. Texan legislators flee the state, and Kylie Cheung on coercion. Hello, David.
Hey man, how are you doing?
Speaking of good-looking suckers,
There we go. There we go. Do I got a little tan? I was just in the beautiful Mexico City where I went on Soberania, the great Mexican politics podcast with Jose Luis and Kurt Hackbarth, which was a lot of fun. But I'm happy to be back home and here with you.
yeah, they were lobbying to get you to to bring Texas back within the fold of Mexico.
I stood outside of the presidential panels for a very, very long time. It did not seem like Claudia was very interested. So
He wasn't taking meetings on it.
offer revoked, frankly. No, folks, we got a jam-packed show. Yeah, in a little bit we'll be talking with Kylie Cheung about her excellent new book, Coercion. We are going to talk about the Texas legislators who have fled the state to prevent this kind of rigging and a big public freakout, rightfully so, over the horrors from the Republican Party in Nebraska. And just a quick reminder, we're going to be at the DSA convention this weekend. So if you are there and a delegate or somebody who's a fan or would like us to chat with you, please reach out because we would love to hear from you. Looking forward to that. And one last programming note before we get into it, Matt, that we are also now doing these as one big show. So patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to the post game. The link's already up, ad-free main show, and then we slide smoothly over into the post game. No more interruption or anything like that. So if you haven't gone over there, haven't joined up, you can do that, patreon.com/leftreckoning. And if you're watching on the public side and you want to make sure that you get the whole thing, go over to Patreon so that you can get that link. Should we talk about the big boy and how good of a job he's been doing, Matt?
Well, people won't stop lying about, even though he's doing the bestest job ever, people keep lying about him.
Mr. Trump has been doing the bestest job ever. No, I mean, folks, we got to talk about the Trump economy because it's extremely worrying, and this is something that is going to have large and long-term negative effects for working-class Americans. But one thing I really want to make abundantly clear to people is that Trump lied. He absolutely lied about what he was going to do. And people have heard me tell the story before, but I will. A few days after the election, I was driving through Johnson City, Texas, and I saw this old woman working behind the counter at a gas station. And you just hate to see that because you hope that people, when they get to a certain age, are able to just retire. She was talking to one of her neighbors about Trump winning, and she said, I voted for Trump because the grocery prices are too high and it's becoming difficult for me. And I've been told that that is one of the first things that he's going to do when he takes office. And I hope that he does it soon. And I remember, my heart sinking in that moment because this is somebody who desperately needed some kind of solution to the crisis that they've probably been facing for a very, very long time and haven't received from politics. And Trump ran a whole campaign on making, the country more affordable. And he lied. And people have a right to be mad about it, and they should.
And just to underline that before we get into this, the people are, like you say, mad about it. And there's this, trying to find this, polling here that shows this on all of his net approval ratings. The thing that's what frankly started the lowest, but also has dropped the fastest is inflation. He's 25 points under on inflation and,
Wow.
12 on the economy for what that's worth.
Yeah, no, I mean, people understand what's going on. I think it's really important for us to be able to be there. But just to put some reality here, we're only a short ways away from a year out from Trump's victory, and he's been a very busy guy. He's been working to take food out of people's mouths, terrorize migrants with ICE, and terrorize your grandma by taking away their food and healthcare. And it's having an effect. And we have this poll right up here. This is just about what people are experiencing in the economy, what their worries are. This is a poll from APNORC about where the people are feeling their biggest source of stress in their life. And overwhelmingly, at the top there, it is the cost of groceries, with 53% of Americans saying that's a major source, 33% saying is at least a minor source, right? Going down that list, you see the cost of housing, the amount of money you get paid, the amount of money you have saved, and oh, surprise, surprise, the cost of healthcare, right? So when you're going out there and you're talking to people across the board, people are giving one message about the Trump economy, that it's getting worse, and that they are stressed out by the rising costs. We have this, we're talking about this because unfortunately it's only going to get worse. This is from Rashida Tlaib talking about groceries specifically and what these organizations are set out to do. They aren't interested in lowering costs. They're interested in seeing how much they can continue to price gouge people. This is Rashida Tlaib arguing in defense of her bill to ban dynamic pricing from grocery organizations.
Families in our community are already struggling with rising grocery prices. It's shameful that companies like Kroger are price gouging our residents with surveillance pricing. Even here, as you can see, companies are already collecting tremendous amount of data and private information about our residents to create custom profiles about them. Now, with these electronic labels, facial recognition technology is now being used in real time to charge us more at the grocery store. Imagine if you were at the grocery store, charged your grocery store right now, and they charge you a higher price for an item because it used technology to determine that you are willing to pay more than the next person. Maybe it's hard to believe, but it's true. You need to stand with your residents, not these corporations. I mean, look at Walmart. Look at this. If it's hot outside, we can raise the prices of water and ice cream like this. That's what we're talking about. We need to protect our residents, and please, again, support my legislation.
And Rashida is 100% right there. I mean, imagine all the different kinds of discrimination and attempts to kind of price gouge working class Americans. I mean, what if you see a mother walking in with their child? They might be willing to spend more on their groceries than a single person, right? I mean, this is something that shows again that these are organizations, that these are companies, that they have one goal only, which is to increase profit. And if the consequences are more and more Americans go hungry, well, so be it. And unfortunately, because of the decisions of the Trump administration, people are going to go hungry. We have this, this has been reported in many places, but groceries are up across the country. We are seeing eggs are continuing to be extremely high priced, 27%, coffee up plus 13.4%, ground beef up 10%, chicken up nearly 4%, right? These are things that people are experiencing. It's not just their feelings. This is, legitimate data that is showing that things are becoming more expensive and people are being squeezed. And this is going to get worse as the effects of the SNAP cuts go into effect. If we get this next one here, as Trump's affordable food ban, the SNAP cuts go into effect, millions of people who are already struggling, are going to struggle even more being able to afford food. And this is going to cost, particularly rural Americans, even more. If you go to this next bit here, we have SNAP cuts are likely to affect 27,000 retailers. And if you look at this graph, this is from Center for American Progress, you can see where those darker colors are predominantly rural and poorer parts of the country. And what happens when you take away SNAP benefits from people? Well, it means that there's less people who are able to spend money. And what do grocery stores do? They either have to raise their prices to compete, or they're shut down. So this is, going to be the effect of Trump's plan to starve the country. Go ahead, Matt.
I mean, just looking in the Dakotas, those red areas are reservations.
Yeah. And you can see the same thing in New Mexico as well.
Yep.
You can see in Texas, we're talking about the Rio Grande Valley, part of the country that has been neglected for a very, very long time. If you go to this next bit here, though, because these are the responses that we're getting from the Trump administration. This is from a New York Times report the other day. Food stamps cuts could deal a blow to small grocers. And I want to note this because this is really important, right? This is Brooke Rollins, who is the agricultural secretary. She said the program, SNAP, was never intended to be a windfall for food companies, retailers, and nonprofits, but rather a temporary safety net for families and communities in need. And I want to be really, really clear about what this is. This is an admission from the Trump administration that they understand that the consequences of their action are going to mean that more of these organizations are going to shut down, which is going to mean people are going to have less access to food, and the food that they have access to is going to be less healthy and way more expensive. Right? This is a full-on admission from the Trump administration that the consequences of their actions are going to be hungry people, people who have less money in their pocket because, again, they say they don't have any responsibility to you. That's not what they view. That they don't view these government programs as things that are important to defend. If you go into this next one, Matt, just continuing the quote here, quote, finally, President Trump's policies are improving the economy and communities across the country. With these improvements come jobs, which will reduce dependence on government assistance, preserving it for those who truly need it. So yeah, no real plan there. And I'm sure most of y'all who are watching the show have seen Trump's freak out over the jobs report revisions. Rather than change his record, Donald Trump is firing the record keepers, right? And I want to explain really quickly what this survey data means, specifically the jobs report. As you can see here, we saw the revisions on recent recent BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, right? And Trump is saying that, oh, because they're revising this means that this is like politically motivated. This is from the New York Times. U.S. employers added more than 250,000 fewer jobs in May and June than was initially reported, the Labor Department said Friday. What had previously looked like healthy gains of more than 140,000 jobs each month now appears to have been a much more anemic gain of just 20,000 jobs. Now, to explain this really quick to folks, the way that these job survey works is they require responses from a host of businesses, both large and small. And as these, as this information comes into the BLS, they get updated. Now, you usually don't see big stories about this because usually these are kind of things that are in line with what's expected. But when you see major revisions like this, it means that there is likely a crisis in a certain industry or with a certain kind of labor. In this case, what it seems like, as Bill Beach told the Odd Lots podcast, who's the former chief of the BLS, says it's likely because small businesses are struggling in the economy because they're not as able to withstand the tariff shocks. So this means that we are seeing slowdowns in jobs for small businesses. And this is going to be made way worse because federal money that had been going to local governments is now drying up, meaning most localities are unable to hire people, creating a deepening crisis in the U.S. labor market. In other words, things are going to get worse. The Trump administration has already admitted that they're getting worse. And what they're trying to do is they are trying to distract from the fundamental reality here. And what we're going to get from Trump is more shenanigans and more attempts to try to cook the books to distract from the genocide in Gaza, his pedophile pals, and the fundamental fact that capitalism is just not working for working class Americans.
Yeah, I mean, well said. And I mean, all of this in the just wiping out small businesses. I saw this guy who had a knife company in Montana, and people were gloating because it was a Trump supporter. But this is a similar thing that happened in I believe the UK, which is that big companies are able to deal post Brexit. Is big companies are able to deal with that stuff. Mm-hmm. You need to have an affirmative agenda if you're going to actually make capitalism deliver for the non-largest sharks in any kind of market.
I mean, like the time of cooking the books too, like any of the GDP growth that we've seen in the early Trump administration, it's turning out actually a significant amount of that kind of purchases and contribution to GDP was companies trying to front load, right? Yes. Meaning stocking up their inventory so that they can withstand these kind of things. And of course, the ones who are best poised to do that are the larger companies.
Yeah, you can buy 2 years worth of raw material ahead of time. Just leave it in a warehouse.
No, it's a lot easier when you're doing that versus like operating a business out of your garage. And the second thing too is I just want to highlight it one more time in case I didn't make it as clear during the initial bit. Was that a big part of this too is that we are seeing a freeze on federal funding, right? We are seeing not only the cuts that are going to go into effect over the next few months, but also COVID money that had been going into rural America and localities all across the country. We're seeing that expire, which means all of a sudden, all of this money that had been going into large parts of the U.S. economy is now getting squeezed at the same time as Trump is making everything more expensive through his tariffs, as we are also seeing this attempt to try to cut, slash, and destroy our social safety net in this country. And these things are going to have massive effects. And I think, as you were saying, Matt, it's really important that we're here to meet those folks instead of wanting to wag our fingers at this or that group, because this is to undo the damage that Trump has done is going to take probably years and years and years of work. And you're going to need majorities. You're going to need an active and mobilized working class to be able to change this kind of thing. Because I think Democrats are going to be very, very happy to see economic devastation, put wind in their sails so that they can come into power. But they're not going to be interested in doing the fundamental things that are going to be necessary to try to, reclaim some stability in working class people's lives. They don't want them to have that either. The only thing is going to change this is that if there is a strong enough working class movement in this country that says, hey, if the Democrats come back into power, we need Medicare for all. We need $20 minimum wage at this point. Right. We need the PRO Act. We need all of these kind of things that Democrats have refused to do time and time and time again. Right. So just sitting here thinking, oh, things are bad, therefore, like the political winds are going to change, in the next cycle. The result might look one way, but what will the effect be on everyday people? And that's why, this is not a time to be kind of complacent. This is not a time to try to, derail solidarity or build connections with people. This is a time to be building those things.
Yeah, because the idea that these things getting worse will lead to improvement in conditions. What's fascinating is how long this impulse is, which does seem self-defeating from the right? Like you're hollowing out these communities, small towns, which you purportedly represent more than big city liberals, depend on hospital funding, and grocery stores and. Just a brief clip here. I always think about this. This is an LBJ tape, a conversation with George Smathers, who I believe was a Florida senator, about Goldwater. And basically Smathers is saying, all the grocery store guys around me don't understand why business people are supporting Goldwater, because they're not going to have, their customers aren't going to have money to spend in the grocery stores. Here's just a little bit of this conversation.
Got a $6 billion surplus of, you'd be backed by a God grass would be going the streets, and these gold guys wouldn't have this prosperity in these jobs. Winn-Dixie, I just before talking to you, talking to son named J.E. Davis, who is probably the biggest, most successful businessman in the whole Southland. He owns this big chain of grocery stores, Winn-Dixie and Quick Check and Colonial and so on, the whole thing. Just this minute, got off the phone with him. And he said, I tell you what, he said, I'll be damned if I can be for Goldwater. And he said, my whole program, and I do $1.7 billion worth of business a year. And he said, it's based on the democratic type philosophy of economics, see? And he said, we may have a little bit of inflation. I'd rather have a little bit of inflation than to go back to the days where everybody's pulling in, nobody's buying things. He said it would kill us. And he said...
Yeah, well, I don't know. Short-term mentality kind of pervades these days with the U.S. capitalist class.
It's crazy because, of course, like Goldwater lost, but pretty much his philosophy ended up winning through Reagan, and that led to neoliberalism, and they're not even done yet. Like neoliberalism was just getting started.
Yeah, 100%. Well, folks, I think we're going to jump over to this conversation with Kylie Cheung. This book is really worth your time. We have a link below for people to pick it up. Enjoy the conversation, and we'll be back talking a little bit more about this, Republican hellscape.
Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as ever, David Griscom. Hello, David.
Hey, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, and I am very pleased to be joined once again by Kylie Cheung. Kylie is the author of this book right here, Coercion, Surviving and Resisting Abortion Bans. She's a Brooklyn-based journalist, author of Survivor and Justice. Work's been seen in Jezebel, Salon, Teen Vogue. Kylie, thanks so much for joining us once again.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
It's good to have you back. And I listened to an interview you did with Joan Esposito, and she asked you, I don't know how you do this. Kylie. You've been somebody who's been watching this, both writing books about it, the attack on reproductive justice in this country, and also reporting on a daily basis on it. Your reflection in this sort of awful transition period from the Roe versus Wade era to this post-Dobbs reality.
Yeah, for the last several years, I've written extensively on kind of the intersections of reproductive justice and gender-based violence. And, I think something that has been really important to me, especially since Dobbs, has been, kind of highlighting how gender-based violence comprises not just interpersonal acts of abuse, but also includes policies and state violence. And I think abortion bans are just such a stark example of that intersection. And I think over the years, something that I've really observed has been, this trend of leading figures in the anti-abortion movement really emphasizing that their laws supposedly don't punish women or punish people who seek abortion. But, I think something that I've always wanted to make really clear with my work has been that forced pregnancy is punishment and is violence. And I think that was something that has really been important to me to show in my work. And that was something that I really wanted to dedicate specifically this book to.
The insincerity of the right, particularly, and we'll get to the sort of liberal organizations at the end, but the insincerity with which they will pretend as if they're trying to address these things. And one of the all-time clips here is Abbott from Texas 3 years ago, talking about how, okay, we don't need to worry about rape and what that what does that mean for like abortion policy, because we're going to eliminate rape. Here's this 30-second clip.
Governor, regarding the heartbeat film, why force a rape or incest victim to carry a pregnancy to term?
It doesn't require that at all, because obviously it provides at least 6 weeks for a person to be able to get an abortion. And so for one, it doesn't provide that. That said, however, let's make something very clear. Rape is a crime, and Texas will work tirelessly to make sure that we eliminate all rapists from the streets of Texas by aggressively going out and arresting them and prosecuting them and getting them off the streets.
So working tirelessly to eliminate rapists seems to work about as well as working tirelessly for a ceasefire. But your reaction to that, Kylie?
Yeah, I think that with that specific clip, there's so much to unpack there. Just for one thing, I think what's so important to address is, his emphasis on framing, I guess, rape and gender-based violence as like this street-based crime. And so much of that language and rhetoric is about it is about pushing propaganda for investing more in policing and in incarceration, when we have seen time and again that in many ways, these are institutions that pose the greatest threat to victims of sexual and gender-based violence. And and I think, another thing that's so important is that, or even just, I believe it was in December of this year, I think that Greg Abbott also rolled out like this campaign of billboards specifically weaponizing really just crude and disgusting rhetoric about rape to to supposedly discourage immigrants from crossing the border. And, I think that really, speaks to the sincerity of his claims to care about that. And also, I think it was in February of 2024, researchers estimated that there had been tens of thousands, about 65,000 rape-induced pregnancies in states that banned abortion since Dobbs in that period. And I think the majority of them were in the state of Texas, which does not have these rape exceptions, which I'm sure we can talk about a bit more later about, how these rape exceptions fail victims. But, I think just the fact that anti-abortion politicians like Greg Abbott don't even feel the need to, insert or pretend to care to the extent that they would include those exceptions, I think also speaks volumes.
Well, and I just want to add that, that was years ago when he said it. And one of the claims that we made, one of the arguments we brought up on this program and other people did as well, is the fact that, many police departments across the state of Texas have tremendous backlogs when it comes to testing rape kits. If they even, go that far in the investigation in the first place. Right. So, to use the kind of rhetoric that he's using there, and then to actually now have, years have gone on where there hasn't been any kind of serious action, I think just shows how disingenuous all of this has been. And I was curious if you could talk about this a little bit, Kylie, because one of the things that has been, I think, really, frightening and worrying, and it goes to the kind of the control and the kind of coercion that goes along with these abortion bans, has been the general confusion. Again, like Texas, was one of the first states to push, these kind of bans. And we're in 2025. And just in the most recent legislative session, they finally passed, some clarification that doctors and practitioners are still saying, we have no idea what is legal, what we can do in a medical setting, so all this kind of talk about like, oh, it's crystal clear back then, and now 5 years later, 2025, we're still sitting here in tremendous confusion about what the law even says, and it feels like, it's whenever the state wants to prosecute somebody is when it's illegal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, like this specific law that Greg Abbott was talking about, this was in 2021. This was SB8, and that was kind of the first real, like, effectively or a near total abortion ban that took effect before Dobbs. And it was at 6 weeks, and it was civilly enforced, which meant that it was enforced in that anyone in Texas could bring a lawsuit for at least $10,000 against anyone who helped someone access abortion or provided abortion. And, I think, as you mentioned, I think that's what's been such a vital tool really in the toolbox of abusers has been confusion and weaponizing misinformation and all of that, because, a lot of these laws are incredibly complicated, even for lawyers and even for journalists. And, I think it's a very fair assumption that a lot of people will make, where if abortion is banned or if abortion carries like a criminal threat, it seems very fair to assume that if you have an abortion, that you will be criminalized. And, I think that what we've seen happen so often is that abusive partners will like weaponize this misinformation and tell their victim if they have an abortion, they'll go to jail, or I'll call the police on you, or I'll sue you, even when, that it is not the case that these laws explicitly criminalize people who have abortions at this time. But, just the landscape that we're in, pregnancy is very innately shrouded in this level of criminal risk and criminal suspicion. I think to your point with regard to all of like that, the confusion and everything with that, it's so interesting because it's like the law that you mentioned that it claims to clarify Texas's exceptions for, the threats to someone's life. The reality that we are consistently seeing is that hospitals will like employ essentially this kind of, it's incredibly dehumanizing, but like this wait and see approach to wait until someone is, close enough to imminently dying where the hospital feels that they can intervene without tremendous legal risk. But that simply doesn't work because, with pregnancy complications, those can worsen and become fatal, like at the drop of a hat. And, all of that, a wait and see approach is incredibly dangerous in that way, or can have, really, really lasting health impacts, even if someone does live. And, with the law that you mentioned that supposedly offers clarification, that was written by like a top anti-abortion organization. And yet so many Texas Democrats really kind of fell for that, even as a lot of reproductive justice advocates in the state were raising that in some ways that bill in its original form, until like journalists kind of exposed this, it was effectively like rolling back, like, I don't even know, I forget, it was like from like the 20th century. It was a really old form of like a Texas abortion ban that would have been even more severe. And there were just so many Democrats who rallied around it. And, it's in so many ways, it's like, I mean, yeah, it was just, it just speaks to how much confusion is weaponized when it comes to these laws.
And just really quick, one last thing is that, like, this is a medical procedure, right? And, you know, in any kind of like doctor to patient relationship, like you don't want to have a bunch of confusion. Like this is something that is not life threatening or serious, but like, you know, I had like a mole that I had to get removed recently. And, you know, I was talking with my doctors like, hey, is this going to be something that, you know, we can, you know, that we can do without me having to pay a shitload of money with my insurance, right? And they were going back and forth with me. It's like, oh yeah, no, of course, no problem. Well, of course, my insurance comes back later and they're like, oh, that was a cosmetic thing and all this kind of stuff, right? And the point here is just saying that, like, you know, this is something where this is a doctor who practices something regularly, is regularly in communication with these kind of organizations, and there's still this kind of ambiguity. And luckily, this is like small potatoes or anything like that. But like the idea of introducing all of this confusion in a medical procedure, when it is something that actually is like life or death versus paying a couple extra $100, right? I mean, this is something that you can imagine. We don't have to imagine. We know is causing tremendous harm all across the country right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, we've already seen just from the early data that has been made available, and all while, you know, in anti-abortion states, their maternal mortality committees, which are not supposed to be partisan institutions, they're just supposed to publish data about like maternal health outcomes. But, you know, we've seen a lot of fights to kind of withhold or manipulate that data. But from what we have seen, we've seen that maternal mortality rates are increasing as a result of abortion bans, and infant mortality rates in Texas. And also, like, ProPublica has done reporting on how sepsis rates in Texas have also really surged, you know, seemingly as a result of abortion bans. And a big part of that is obviously that, you know, when you know, sepsis infections can occur when fetal tissue remains in the uterus and, you know, isn't removed in a timely manner with, you know, emergency abortion care. And, you know, that can be a leading cause of death among pregnant people. And yeah, it's just, all of this is just incredibly preventable and very much is state violence.
Yeah, and you know, you talk about certain in certain states, just health professionals deciding, I don't need this headache here, I'm not going to provide health care there. And the horror, I think, that you really convey in this book is that you have this lack of clarity from the professional side of things. But when it comes to abusers, they know what, say, it means if their partner is pregnant and they wanted a divorce from them. Like, I was shocked. I guess I'm naive about certain these things. I didn't know that divorces in certain states, you can't get a divorce if you're pregnant. Can you just talk about this sort of thing, about how abusers benefit from these sorts of restrictions?
Yeah, you know, I don't think many people do know about how, you know, there are several states, both states that impose abortion bans and states where abortion rights are protected, where courts either can't or are extremely discouraged from allowing a divorce to be finalized while someone's pregnant, and even if they are experiencing abuse. And, you know, I think that something that I really tried to convey in Coercion was that, you know, a big thing that I think abortion bans do is help to normalize intimate partner violence-based acts of reproductive coercion being, you know, acts of controlling or punishing someone's reproductive decisions, often from an abusive partner. And yeah, you know, I think that obviously on an interpersonal level, reproductive coercion is wrong and reprehensible, but like anti-abortion politicians will see simply, you know, they don't have a leg to stand on to condemn these acts when their laws are reproductive coercion, even as, you know, they frequently are more and more invoking this talking point about trying to equate abortion access, or, you know, trying to weaponize a few, like one or two anecdotes of someone giving abortion pills to someone without their consent, which is already illegal as is, to like justify more and more attacks on abortion pills and further stigmatize abortion as like this piece, or like as innately abusive, when, you know, the reality that we've seen is that the leading cause of death in the US for pregnant people is homicide, often by an intimate partner. And we know that abuse will, it's more like, or yeah, we see often enough that abuse can escalate or begin for the first time while someone's pregnant. We saw, I think, in the first 1 year period after Dobbs, that the National Domestic Violence Hotline said that they'd received double the amount of calls involving reproductive coercion compared with the year before Dobbs. And I think that some of those calls included people whose partners had tampered with their birth control, and that resulted in them becoming pregnant in a state that banned abortion, or people whose callers threatened to sue or call the police on them for if they chose to access abortion. And, I already mentioned, I think, the research that estimated that there have been tens of thousands of rape-induced pregnancies in abortion-banned states within a year and a half or so of Dobbs. And, something that I've also been able to research and include in the book is that, rape-induced pregnancies can tie someone to their rapist for really the rest of their lives and, lead to lifelong, really traumatic and expensive court battles. We've also seen that victims have told the National Domestic Violence Hotline that having access to a reproductive health clinic has been life-saving for them, because in some cases that's the first environment where, a healthcare worker will notice that something is wrong and offer support. But we've seen since Dobbs that so many of these women and victims have lost access to that. And, something else, just again mentioning those cases of abusive partners or abusive or controlling partners who threaten those lawsuits or to call the police over someone having an abortion. We've seen top anti-abortion organizations, including Texas Right to Life, lead recruitment campaigns and even partner with the Texas Attorney General's office to identify and recruit men who would file these lawsuits, because, for the Attorney General's office, a big part of the motivation there is, to instigate these lawsuits that they hope will go up to the Supreme Court and stop, doctors from out of state from being able to mail abortion pills into the state. But for abusive partners, whether they're interested in abortion law or not, that's just another tool in their toolbox to control and terrorize their victims.
Yeah, there's that, like, the snitch hotlines that is just like dystopian in itself. And then also you mentioned in the book, women searching options for terminating pregnancies and then later having a miscarriage, and that being used as evidence for them committing the crime of terminating a pregnancy. That is just unbelievable.
Yeah, something I think about, because even in the years before Dobbs, I was really intrigued and like horrified by how common, criminal cases related to pregnancy were. And, I interviewed experts at the organization Pregnancy Justice quite often. And something that really stood out to me that one attorney mentioned was that, you don't need an abortion to criminalize pregnancy, and that of the over 1,000 cases of pregnancy-related criminal charges that were in the period between when Roe v. Wade was decided and the last couple of years before Dobbs, many of these charges were for things like manslaughter or, feticide or child endangerment, child abuse, abuse of a corpse, all of these things that are really kind of rooted around this idea of fetal personhood, which is this legal theory. And this is kind of like the end game really of the anti-abortion movement in a lot of ways. But it's about, conferring personhood rights on embryos and fetuses. And, these rights are innately separate from and at odds with the pregnant person, and render the pregnant person exponentially more vulnerable to state violence, to criminalization, where these behaviors of theirs that otherwise would not be an issue are because they're pregnant. And, I think that one big part of collecting evidence against people for these supposed crimes, in many cases has been, their digital history. And, they'll usually come to the attention of law enforcement when healthcare workers might report them or acquaintances, because, there's, and obviously that's horrible, horrible behavior. And, another component is there's so much misunderstanding, I think, among healthcare workers about what mandatory reporting requires or necessitates. But, to be clear, we'll never require reporting someone for experiencing something like pregnancy loss or even self-managing their abortion. But, often that is how individuals will come to the attention of law enforcement. And then from there, people may not know about different rights that they might have. And then, their digital histories will often be searched. And that has very often led to cases like what you mentioned.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. You quote a Oklahoma lawmaker saying, I understand that they feel like it's their body, he said of pregnant people. I feel like it's separate. What I call them is you're a host. And you've seen that around like the sort of Turning Points USA type of crew as well.
Yeah, I think that was in
Yeah.
2017, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. 2017, 5 years before Dobbs, about a bill to require consent of the father. Let's talk about rape exceptions here. It's something like Tim Pool likes to bring up. Like, what is it? And I mean, maybe explain for people why they're non-starters on a practical level, but also like, what does it mean broadly that this becomes the thing we talk about?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm so sorry that you've had to watch Tim Pool videos. That sounds really awful. And
Different occupational hazards. Yeah.
I'm glad I have no idea what you're talking about, because I feel like that would make, I don't even know, that would give me an aneurysm. But yeah. Okay. So basically, I think even before Dobbs and even before abortion bans, there would be, a wide range of different abortion restrictions and, sometimes things like age requirements or different requirements for minors and all of these other different like gestational limits on this or that. And sometimes there would be exceptions that were attached to them. And those would often be rape exceptions. And then, post Dobbs, now that, I believe over a dozen states have total or near total abortion bans, and many other states have different abortion laws. I think that something that's interesting is there will be kind of this focus in some spaces on whether or not those laws offer exceptions for rape victims. And I think something that I think about a lot, or something that a pattern that I've definitely noticed while reporting on both gender-based violence and on abortion rights is that so often like we'll be told that there are quote unquote good victims or like good rape victims or bad rape victims based on their behaviors, or we'll kind of see the same for abortion patients or people who seek abortions, where we'll implicitly be told there are good abortion seekers like a child rape victim and bad abortion seekers like someone who just wants to have an abortion because they don't want to be pregnant, which, is the only reason that anyone should ever need. But, I think that we'll see kind of this surface level distinction, even when the reality is like under rape culture and under abortion bans, their victims and abortion seekers are all dehumanized and denied agency. But yeah, I think that what's really important to note about these exceptions is that often enough, they're simply not accessible and they're simply not helping people access abortion. And I would very much argue that anti-abortion politicians who advocate for these exceptions or include them, they know that most people are not able to access abortions under these exceptions, because the reality is that like in these states, if doctors fear prison time or punishment, they're still likely not going to provide abortions, whatever the circumstances that are presented to them are, especially when, the other big problem with these exceptions is that there is no specification really for how they're accessed. I think that we saw in 2023, there was reporting about a 12-year-old girl in Mississippi who had been who carried her pregnancy. And there is a rape exception in Mississippi, but when reporters asked different officials in the state government how, this would be accessed, they didn't receive any response. And, I think that's something else that's so important to stress, is that the other problem with exceptions like this is that they kind of imply that, if you report a rape or if you come forward, that you'll just be believed, or that that's something that's easy to do, when we've seen that, both law enforcement and even within the medical system, there's a lot of hostility and skepticism that victims are met with. And yet, I think a few years ago, Tennessee Republicans introduced a bill that would have added a rape exception to their abortion ban, but it threatened anyone who lied about this with 3 years in prison, which is horrifying and insane. But, the other aspect of this that's frustrating is that I think most states that have total or near total abortion bans don't even offer that exception, which I think really it speaks volumes that they don't even feel, the need to seek that good PR, or don't even believe that their laws, they don't even feel compelled to like sanitize, like even perform like sanitizing their laws in that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a, God works in mysterious ways sort of thing in some of those states. Let's move into the liberal side of things. And I got a series of tweets from Adam Gentleson, who used to be John Fetterman's chief of staff. And I think it captures some of the complacency around this issue that I'm wondering if you're as frustrated as I was. This is Adam Jensen says, Dobbs continues, this is before the election, basically as part of a thread where he's trying to say that Kamala Harris is in good shape to win. He says, Dobbs continues to resonate profoundly. Pundits and many strategists downplayed how much it would matter in 2022, and I think their history is rhyming in 2024. In 2022, there was pervasive skepticism. Abortion would manifest at the ballot box on par with inflation. It did. In 2024, there's the same tone about whether it will be decisive. It will. I'd also not be surprised to see it show up as an issue for more men because 2 years worth of post-Dobbs coverage. Anyway, like the point I'm trying to make here is Adam Gentleson saw that as a meal ticket. And it was going to ride back into power on that, and it blew up in their faces. But I'm just curious what your sort of response is to how, maybe on the good side, but also in the maybe complacent and, impotent side of things from the liberal response to the post-Dobbs reality we're living in.
Yeah, definitely. And, like the election definitely had huge implications for reproductive rights. But, I think that's something that's so important. And that I think that, a lot of Democratic Party leaders have just really either failed to grasp or just don't care to grasp is that like abortion and reproductive rights and reproductive justice don't exist within this silo, if that makes sense. I think that's something I really wanted to define and introduce early on in the book is, the principle of reproductive justice, which was, established by Black feminists in the 1990s and looks at how, everyone should be able to parent or not parent in safe, healthy communities. And it's an international framework, which means, just as that demands universal health care and universal abortion access in the United States, it's also demanding something like, or it also demands Palestinian liberation. And I think, it demands everyone's ability to be pregnant or give birth or parent, in environments safe from things like apartheid or starvation or genocide. And I think that, as I was, or, over the course of 2024, it was definitely incredibly frustrating and just really sometimes felt like being in like a different reality where you'll see that so many of the same, in some national organizations that would claim to support reproductive rights or Democratic politicians who really tried to position themselves as champions on that issue, it's extremely hollow when, or it was extremely just like warped and just in many ways, like, just disgusting and incredibly bizarre because, at the same time I was speaking quite regularly with like humanitarian workers and healthcare workers in Gaza who, all of the same horrific pregnancy complications that you'll see in the United States, they're happening in Gaza, but without anesthetic and without, without access to hospitals because Israel has destroyed or blockaded all of that with U.S. taxpayer dollars or with weapons that the same Democratic lawmakers who claim to care about reproductive rights are continuing to send and continuing to create political cover for. And so, I think it's very disingenuous in ways that I think that people can understand. And I also think that it just also speaks to how, certainly like here in the United States, I think that, there are limits to when you're just advocating for rights specifically because just like the Dobbs ruling itself really exposed how tenuous like a rights-based framework is and how we deserve so much more than that. And that, I think in so many ways, a big part of like why we're in the situation that we're in today, it didn't happen in a vacuum where one day the Supreme Court just had that ruling or one day Trump just became president. There were so many concessions and compromises that were made by Democrats who claim to support reproductive rights for years or decades even that paved the way for all of that. And, in a lot of, I think that for so long, it was kind of just accepted that if we had this right to abortion, that there was nothing else that Democrats needed to do. But, clearly that mythology was very much destroyed after Dobbs. And, yeah, sorry.
No. No. On that, I think one of the I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but one of the things going into 24 is Matt said they were treating abortion as a kind of a meal ticket for the Democratic Party, they were going to win on this. But and the fact of the matter is, and I just want to remind people of, is abortion rights are wildly popular in the U.S. Even in red states. This is not something that is so over determined the way that it gets talked about publicly. These are not popular laws. But what happened was not so much that people were oh, we don't care about this anymore. I think a lot of people were I don't think the Democrats are going to do very much about it. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't really feel like they were going to do very much on it other than kind of campaign. We think that this is bad what they are doing. Now we are going to do something to protect these rights.
Yeah. And it's I obviously didn't want Trump to win. And I think that has created such a huge entryway to make things much, much worse. But at a certain point, it does just become coercive to tell people, if you don't do this, if you don't vote for this, if you don't vote for us, everything will just get worse, instead of offering a counter vision of something to actually make people's lives better. And, I think that is very much true in the realm of Democrats and reproductive rights, and what it would actually look like to to build back our rights or build back our access to healthcare. And I don't think that was ever something that National Democrats articulated.
Yeah, that's something maybe for the future post-revolutionary party that we're going to start up, that will stop the genocide stuff and also be supportive of reproductive justice. Kylie, the book is Coercion. People can pick it up from Pluto Press. You get the audiobook and the EPUB version of it. I can't recommend it more. I do want to ask you, because I didn't ask you any basketball things last time we had you on. Have you noticed Luka, Men's Health Luka? What's your reaction to Men's Health Luka?
I think it's interesting because, I think for the last several summers, I think he's ended up looking a bit thinner because he's not living in the United States and he just eats healthier in Europe. But he always comes back to himself, which I think is great. And I think people should stop trying to change him. And I think at a certain point, maybe people should really start asking themselves if him being larger or a bit chubby is why he's good at, I don't even know. Because sometimes I think people need fat to cook,
yes,
in the kitchen, but also for him, maybe. I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking about.
Oh, look, I'm a Timberwolves fan. We got smoked by that guy. Not even, I guess 2 years ago now. He was pretty formidable, and despite the weight, but yeah. Also, James Harden versus Luka. Are you Clippers over Lakers because of James?
Yeah, I definitely support it. I don't know. I think that the Clippers will be okay. I don't think that there's a very high ceiling on them. The Lakers I thought would be a lot better than they were in the last playoffs. That was really, I don't know. I thought they would win in 5 or 6, and then they essentially got swept. So that was interesting. But
yeah,
also
that was with my Timberwolves too, I guess too. But we'll have to have you back on in the midst of the season to see who Kylie is rooting for. But yeah, until then, people check out the book. Thanks, Kylie.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Yeah, we got to read a couple of great books this weekend.
I know.
And, yeah, good talking to Kylie. And I always appreciate her. She should have a basketball podcast. I feel like she appears on some Knicks ones sometimes, but yeah.
Speaking of which, next week, folks, we are going to be talking with none other than Mr. Seth Harp, whose excellent new book is coming out, The Fort Bragg Cartel. We'll have plenty to talk about it next week, but just grab it if you can, because I think it's going to sell out, and it's very good.
Yeah, if you have ever done any reading on the Phoenix program with Vietnam or Iran-Contra, it actually, it's about the special forces and JSOC, as well as Fort Bragg and all the mysterious, crazy shit that has been going on there in the past half decade.
No, I mean legitimately shocking stuff, and Matt and I are people who keep up with American war crimes, and we were still pretty moved by this.
Yeah, well, it's the sort of thing where like there's all these like, oh, another murder, oh, murders, a suicide. It's like what the hell is going on? And actually, it's a pretty old story of narco trafficking and U.S. interventions and occupations abroad, and kind of makes a lot of sense actually.
Yeah, but no, I totally agree. But I did just want to add something I neglected to say to Seth. But one thing I did appreciate about the book is that while he had plenty of fire and condemnation for the perpetrators of horror, there is a kind of there's a sympathy in the book for how much this is also destroying the lives of American service people as well.
Yes, I think that comes through with the degree to which people opened up to him that have gone through some of the most horrible shit imaginable.
Well, anyways, we'll be able to we'll share that with y'all next Tuesday. Show's not over though. We got plenty to get to before we go over to the post game. But if you want to make sure you don't miss a thing, sign up at patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access. Plus, you get the whole main show. No ads from the get-go. So go over there and jump on if you haven't jumped over to that side. And if you haven't subscribed and supported Matt and I, maybe this is the time to do it. But I want to talk a little bit about support, Matt. We'll talk about the Texas story in just a little bit. But the Texas story, just like many other things happening in this country, is an attempt by the ruling party, the ruling government, to avoid accountability. And this out of Nebraska was pretty exceptional. Representative Mike Flood of Nebraska held something that most Republicans are afraid to do now, which is a town hall. Town halls are an integral part of the American democratic tradition. It's the idea, some might call it radical, that representatives should be responsive to the whims and the concerns and the criticism of their constituents. That's something that in American politics, we find politicians more and more, both Republican and Democrat, uninterested in engaging in. Now, this was a pretty exceptional moment because Flood did show up for a town hall, and it did not go his way. The attendance was through the roof. People stood outside for hours to get access to it. And we have some of the clips of some of the things that people said. But just if you haven't seen it, I just want people to get a sense at how raucous this town hall was in Nebraska. Mike Flood is a Republican. This is how people responded in Lincoln, Nebraska, to him talking about Trump's food ban, the SNAP cuts, all of this.
It talks about two big changes to the Medicaid program. One of those changes is that if you are able to work and you are able-bodied, you have to work. If you choose not to work, you do not get free health care. You do not get free health care. Okay. So here's a question.
I think that gives people enough of a flavor. This is somebody who is going up there trying to defend his record. The big beautiful bill that Trump kind of forced through Congress and Republicans were happy to give to him is something that is extremely unpopular with people because people understand that are becoming more and more educated on, as well as people learn about how much nasty stuff was inside of this bill. People understand that this is not in their interest. This is completely different from the campaign that, as we talked about at the beginning, was talking about lowering grocery prices and making life easier for people, right? Putting more money back in your pocket. It's absolutely clear to anybody with a brain that what we saw here was a giveaway to the rich and a class war from above on working class Americans. And you're seeing the correct reaction from these Nebraskans. And that's something, by the way, that would happen all across this country, but Republicans are too chicken to show up in their own districts and talk to their constituents.
Yeah, it's such barbarity. This is the country's in 2021 with universal health care.
Yeah.
Okay, look at this America. Look at the other countries it's in league with. That is an absolute embarrassment. And to say that unless you are serving a capitalist, aka the guy who pays for that guy's campaigns, unless you are breaking your back 5 days a week and there's one in your community that can employ you, you're not underemployed, you're able to find a job. Unless that's the case, then you shouldn't be able to get health care. This is barbaric, and it only underscores the everyday barbarism that this is tied to employment at all.
And you know what, Matt? Just a really quick, like, this is something that I think most people instinctively understand, which is why Republicans have to spend so much time presenting this kind of false narrative that there's a bunch of freeloaders, people who aren't working and are kind of living high on the hog, on our welfare, our public good systems in this country, right? Because most people don't support cuts of food programs going to single mothers, right? Most people don't want to see children go hungry, and most people don't want to live under the tyranny of the American private healthcare system, right? Poll after poll shows, even when the opposition party, the Democrats, refuse to campaign on it, it still is wildly popular because most people have direct experience, or at least know somebody or understand the fear. Hell, we talked about at the beginning of the show, the number one fear that people had for major concern about their finances was grocery prices, because those are rising. But across the board, when it came to major and minor sources of stress, it was healthcare, undoubtedly, because it is something that, even if it's not immediate, it's always kind of sitting on your back. So Republicans have to tell these kind of stories. They're like, oh, look, these people are taking advantage of the system. You're not getting that. Doesn't that create resentment, anger, all this kind of stuff? That's the only political tactic that they have, because what they actually want to do, right, which is just refuse healthcare to people across the board, is extremely unpopular, as we see in this. And we have more of this clip, but I want to let you in here.
Yeah, it's just like the sort of thing where we're so fucked in this country with regards to the politics of this, because, like you said, this is his district. It includes Omaha and Lincoln, and so like a college town and a large part of the city. But like you say, the polling is clear on this. Everyone hates this system. But the situation we have now, where the Democrats are in large part primary beneficiaries of health insurance industry campaign donations, and that's in part because they're corrupt, but also because a guy like Mike Flood, Republicans, they're reliable. That we're not going to get rid of the private profiteers in health insurance, and the Democrats are so bought that they're still unable to speak to this issue. And it's not a mystery why. It's because they're corrupt. It's because if you're taking universal or United Health money, you're not going to be for Medicare for all.
No. Well, let's look at some folks who are for Medicare for all. And look, these are everyday Nebraskans showing up to see their elected representative speak, and it's very powerful what this gentleman has to say here.
A lot's been talked about Medicaid, healthcare, etc. A lot of countries in the world, Europe, Canada, they have healthcare for the people there. Outside, just now you said, you don't want to see a lazy 28-year-old get health care, whatever. My point is, every working and retired American should be entitled to health care. Would you sign on or write up a bill for Medicare for all? We've got Medicare now. We can start rolling back the age 5, 10 years at a time. Would you support that?
We can't afford that.
Yes, you can.
No, I mean, this is just something that I think there's a reason why they don't have these kind of public rallies, and I think across the board, even the debates, oh man, the idea that they don't have audiences for the debates anymore, I think is horrendous, because when you allow people to kind of speak in sterilized TV studios, news studios, and kind of deliver nonsense lines like this, you don't hear the outrage that is across this country. People are fed up with this bullshit. It's absolutely bullshit to be talking like this, especially after what they just did, right? Especially after what they just did with the U.S. budget.
It's been about 20 years, not quite 20 years, where this has been the sort of image of populist anger. And I go all the way back to the Tea Party, which was, of course, as we know, right-wing bullshit started by some traitor in Chicago. But what were they complaining about? Government death panels, government deciding through austerity that people's lives were less important than the taxpayer money.
Yeah, that's a good
Right?
point.
Like we've been living through this, and I'll just notice the top industries, just the number one top industry for Mike Flood here, insurance.
Oh, interesting. I wonder.
Interesting. That's the only industry that gave him over $100,000 in PAC contributions. So we don't look. We got all this sorts of money for buying politicians, Mike. Can't we tax some of that and put it towards keeping hospitals open?
The problem is people aren't donating him enough money from the other side. So, you just need to bribe him, right? He's just a cheap soul and a cheap person. Yeah, we're going to watch another couple seconds of this and then.
We protected Medicaid as the safety net for those who cannot care for themselves, who are vulnerable, for those who are able-bodied and working. I will tell you this, and I cannot take any credit for it. President Trump is going to bring down prescription prices because the countries you mentioned have been paying way too little for way too long, and we've been subsidizing them. And if we as a country I want to pay the same price for the drugs that are in London as they are in Lincoln. And that has not happened for a long time.
Well, maybe you should have the NHS.
You know what he's doing here? What Trump is doing is saying, I don't like the cheap deal. You guys have to start playing American prices. It has nothing to do with getting our prices down.
100%.
It's about getting those. It's about being able to rake profits out of those countries like we're being raked.
Yeah, and these are people who have fought for years against allowing systems like Medicare and Medicaid to be able to do direct drug negotiation prices. Because guess what? Their bosses in the pharmaceutical industry don't want them to do that, right? It's just complete bullshit, and everybody knows it. And it's one of those things like we don't play too much of like Republicans saying bullshit on the show because it'd be exhausting. It'd be the only fucking thing that we do. It is so nice to see everyday people responding to this kind of thing because that is the exact correct reaction and the exact emotion that's felt by millions of people across this country. And it is exactly why Republicans are fighting so hard right now to limit and restrict democracy. And that brings us to Texas. We're under the orders of Donald Trump, right? Somebody who could give two shits about all of the people who just died after the July 4th flooding across this state. Said, hey, Texas legislature, I know y'all are trying to do something to maybe make sure that there's early warning systems or that we invest in our flood infrastructure. Throw that to the side. I need you to rig the elections in the state of Texas so that I can protect myself from the oncoming wave of dissatisfaction as more and more Americans are waking up to the fact that Donald Trump and the Republican Party represents the bosses and the billionaires and the enemies of the working people. I need to make sure that we limit their ability to affect change in their government. That's what Donald Trump asked of people like Greg Abbott. And somebody like Greg Abbott said, I'll jump as high as you want. I'll do whatever it is that you want. And this is what they've pushed, right? Everybody made it abundantly clear at the get-go of this recent special session that if we want to get any kind of action for the victims of the flooding, they need to do it up front. And they did. They pushed this nonsense, right? So I just wanted to, as we get into all of this other stuff, I want you to remember those children who drowned, those two little girls who were found holding on to one another, that they're secondary to Donald Trump's political career in the minds of Texas Republicans, and just how sickening and disgusting that is. Now, we can get into some of the facts here. People have probably seen the headlines because it's become a national story. They are trying to gerrymander this state. Texas is already one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. These maps that they're putting forward, they're trying to make it so that Republicans would win around 85% of congressional seats in the upcoming election. Just to give people like a kind of general sense of what it would look like if we had like fair representation, Republicans would hold around 58% of seats. So this isn't, they're just trying to put some things in their favor a little bit. They're trying to set themselves up for a situation where fuck the 42% of Texans who might go the other way. We only want those people to get 15% of the representation, right? We talk about this. This is American tradition. We find it objectionable to have taxation without representation. But that is exactly what Trump and the GOP are pushing here. So in response, because the Democrats for decades have been so weak, they don't have the ability to push back against this. The Republicans do have the majorities necessary to put forward this, frankly, illegal attempt to gerrymander the state further. Reminder, by the way, that these maps aren't up for redrawing, right? They are taking, they're making a special exception, saying that actually the old maps that we approved, the Republican Party of Texas approved and drew up, were illegal, right? That's the kind of argument that they're making, which is complete bullshit on its face.
Yeah,
So,
it's all just making stuff up. And the law says you have to do it once after every you have to do it after every census. And they said, well, it doesn't say you can't do it twice after the census, though.
So it's a complete joke. So to prevent them from doing this, Democrats have fled the state. I believe it's 51 Democrats have fled to multiple different places: Chicago, Massachusetts, New York City. And this this attempt at gerrymandering is undoubtedly illegal. We've talked a little bit about how maybe it could backfire because of the fact that despite what Trump and a lot of the people think, Texas is not so automatically conservative, right? There is a potential, particularly if Texas Democrats were a little bit more serious about winning and started running progressive pro-working class candidates instead of the chicken shit people like Colin Allred that they've been running in the past. It could be very competitive here. And what the attempt is to spread out the votes of Democrats, particularly people who live in the majority of the population centers of the state: Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, et cetera, right? This is an attempt to try to diffuse those votes so that the rural voters, which have now become so solidly Republican, will be able to kind of outweigh them, right? But that does mean that some of those safe Republican seats that, maybe are like 15, 20, 30% pro-Republican will be a little bit more marginal. So even if they have an advantage, it means that Republicans would have to run. So there was already some pushback from congressional Republicans in the Texas GOP, just because they didn't want to have to be bothered with campaigning. We'll see about whether or not that's able to backfire. But until then, this quorum is ongoing. And I just we can talk about some of the response from the GOP and Greg Abbott in a second, but I just want to kind of break down for people, if you're curious, what it would take for Texas Democrats to win on this. So what they have done is they have broken quorum. Quorum, by the way, breaking quorum is a protected right in the Texas Constitution. It is a tactic just as legitimate as the filibuster is in the Senate, right? You might not like it, but it's something that has been established. It is not a kind of new idea or anything like that. It's been done time and time again, actually, in the state of Texas. What they would need to do, though, is they would have to refuse quorum, as the governor calls special sessions, for probably around 3 sessions. They would have to run the clock out until November, when the 2026 filings have to go in. And if they can wait that long, if they can take it down that long, that would mean that the maps as they are now would have to stand at least for the 2026 election. And that's what they're going to try to break and prevent. Now, that would require, if 12 Democrats return to Texas, then it's all over. And this has been a problem in the past. The Texas Democrats are not a very united bunch. It doesn't take too much to pull somebody away. They could be kind of pressured, and we'll get into some of the political and legal pressures that the GOP is putting forward, or they could just kind of be like, I need to get back home to do this or that. So it's a big task if they could be able to do it. And we'll have to see if they are able to. It'd be good for democracy, it'd be good for the U.S., and it'd be good for Texas. I think that it's fairly unlikely that they'll be able to hold out as long, just given the kind of commitment we've seen in the past from certain folks. But we'll watch. I want to get into some of the stuff, unless you had anything to add about what they're trying to do to bring them back in, because this is the kind of thing that's very worrying.
Yeah, no, just continue with that before we talk about the gerrymandering broadly.
Oh, yeah. So what they're doing right now, and I have this video here. This is from the Texas Ledger just the other day.
Being 85 ayes in 6 days, the motion prevails. The sergeant-at-arms and any officers appointed by her are directed to send for all absentees whose attendance is not excused for the purposes of securing and maintaining their attendance under warrant of arrest if necessary until further order of the House.
So that's a call on the sergeant of arms to to compel people in Texas. They don't have the authority, obviously, to cross state lines to do that. They have been trying to petition the federal government to get involved, which would again be a huge violation of our political rights. Now, this is the thing, though, that is kind of next level here. This is from Greg Abbott. Greg Abbott put out this statement recently. Today, I took emergency action to begin the removal from office of derelict Texas Democrat Texas House members who refused to show up for the special session. Now, I want to be clear and fair about the legality. They do have the right, and it has been established. They do have the right to arrest and compel somebody within state lines to show up at quorum. They have the ability to do financial penalties, which that's why the Democrats are fundraising right now to sort of cover the costs of the financial penalties. They do not whatsoever have the right to annul an election. This is an extreme power grab here. And what legal basis do they have for this? I'm not making this up. His citation is the cockeyed and crooked Ken Paxton's legal theory that he cooked up just a couple years ago, right? So no. This is illegal under the Texas Constitution, under the U.S. Constitution, and under just the umbrella of common sense. The people of Texas elect their representatives, not Greg Abbott, not Ken Paxton. And we should take this as a joke in the sense that this is an absolutely laughable assertion by Greg Abbott, but we should take it absolutely serious that we are seeing a governor threaten to remove people from office, elected office, because he doesn't like the political positions that they're taking. To give people who might not understand the kind of ins and outs here, it would be like if somebody in the Senate did the filibuster. Hell, man, it might be annoying, we might not like it. And the US president said, we're gonna remove them from office, right? It is, quorum breaking is protected under the Texas Constitution. This is not something that you have the ability or the right to threaten people's elected position.
You don't get to represent all of the people who voted you into office anymore.
Yeah. No. I mean, it is a total joke. And this would have to go through the courts. And remember, because we've had decades now of Republican rule, this is a system of folks who are extremely loyal, including the Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court, who Greg Abbott has said in the past that he put them in that position because he wanted to always know which way a legal decision would go. So that's democracy and corruption in the state of Texas. We can get into some of the gerrymandering stuff, but I did just want to add one thing that is extremely nasty, and I guess shouldn't surprise me at this point because all is kind of possible in Texas politics. Remember the little nasty fellow Briscoe Cain, who, as they were pulling bodies out of the river, drowned children, was tweeting about how we cannot allow this to be used to grow government. This is Mays Middleton, who is a Texas senator, who said about Gene Wu, and Gene Wu is the leader of the Democrat caucus in Texas, says, is Gene Wu back in China? And I just wanted to make sure that we highlight that nasty little ghoul here. So, these people...
Little fucking pricks, man.
Absolutely. These are people who don't care about the rule of law. They don't care about the Texas Constitution. And they certainly want to make sure that there is no kind of uproar like we saw in Nebraska. They want to limit people's ability to criticize them, right? They want to limit people's ability to push back against these public servants, people who should be serving the people of Texas, right? And that would mean showing up and doing something about all the flood victims instead of doing the bidding of the bloated billionaire Donald Trump, who wants to rig the elections because people are pissed about the fact that they're unable to afford food.
Yeah, in the context of the inflation shit just getting worse, and all of a sudden it looks like the economy walked off a cliff, you're talking about how to stack the next election. It's such a low, scraping the bottom place when it comes to so-called democracy.
100%. And so do you want to talk about some of the Republican influencers who are trying to defend the gerrymandering. So this is a moron by the name of Jessica 05, who's working hard, defeating wokeness, quote, defeating wokeness. One post at the time. Might be a little bit more about common sense here. She's got a nice big audience, still around 500,000 followers. Thank you, Mr. Musk, for that. So she says, this is a, quote, real Democrat district in Texas. This is what a stolen House seat actually looks like. And ostensibly she's saying this, I don't know what she thinks she's saying here because, so this is the current seat. And the person who is in this seat is Greg Casar. Greg Casar is a Texas progressive, former city council member of Austin. And if you see here, let's see if I can make this a little larger for y'all. His district absurdly goes all the way from Austin to San Antonio, two completely different cities. That's not a natural political community. That is an attempt to pigeonhole, to put together large population centers so that rural Texans and Republican voters can control the seats of West Austin, have access to other parts of San Antonio, right? This isn't something about, representing like an actual place. And so she's absolutely right. That does look like a gerrymandered seat. It's gerrymandered by the fucking Republicans, you moron. You guys don't even know anymore what it is that you're supposed to be arguing for. Because this is abundantly clear here that yes, these are gerrymandered seats. The Republican Party did it, and they're trying to do it again. But unlike Casar, who has this kind of weird seat, which is trying to limit votes in San Antonio and Austin, they're trying to just pack all of Casar into one area so that they can cut up Austin even more to advantage Republicans, right? They don't even remember the fact that these are the maps that the Republican Party put forward just a few years ago that they gerrymandered to favor them in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is there's only so much juice you can squeeze from this. And it is a menacing attack on democracy. But the stupidity of this is, I don't know if you saw this. This is Kennedy, the former MTV VJ. She had some comments, and let's see if you can just find the little mistake here.
Right. It's like TDS off the chart. Yes. It's all about them versus Trump. And why? Because they're so thirsty politically.
Yeah, but this is why California is a monoparty state. That's why Democrats have a supermajority. And, it's like, that's why they have two Democrat senators. That's why they have a Democrat governor. And, it is such a massive majority because of this type of
Do you want to take that one, David?
What is she talking about?
She's saying that, California the reason California is so blue is because of gerrymandering. And she cites a couple of offices that are elected statewide in the Senate seats and the governor's position, which you cannot, of course, gerrymander because it's whoever's in the state. But this idea, like, they have Trump derangement syndrome. The only reason we're talking about
is because he ordered it.
Exactly.
And this is documented. This isn't a secret. He's asked for it. He's talked about it. He goes and he says, they need to make me a good map. They should make me a good map. What the fuck are you talking about? The Trump derangement system. They are following the orders of their boss.
Yeah. Like, why are we talking about this now? It's because Trump wants to. And like California and New York actually do have independent commissions that they are going to axe now, because it is clear, like, you can't unilaterally disarm. I agree with this. Like, they have to make Republicans in their state scream that you do not want to get in a race to the bottom on this. Like, I don't know. The problem is I don't really see unless the Texans can hold the line here, but a race to the bottom seems kind of
it seems like
inevitable.
exactly what they're going to have to do. I mean, we'll probably just see gerrymandering. Unless the Democrats decide not to fight, but it sounds like we've gotten moves from plenty of Democrat governors that they're going to push it. So the democracy in America will get more and more absurd.
Yeah. The good news is it's been pretty absurd to begin with because of the states on the Democrat side that can do stuff, like Maryland, for instance, doesn't have any commission. They could just decide to do what Texas might decide to do. But they've already basically stacked it to the point where there's no more juice in that because politicians, they didn't just start gerrymandering now. Right? Like, And like we talked about it when this first came up, like there is a liability there too.
Yeah.
Like you say, and you start complaining about like what Greg Casar, why is he? Well, he's a product of you trying to make several seats safer for your guys.
Exactly. And you know, there is a big assumption here, by the way, that the Rio Grande and South Texas voters will continue to vote Republican in the way that they did historically, right? Breaking from tradition, you know, for Trump in 2024, right? That could get him. We're going to go over post game for a second, but maybe I can just a quick one. So San Antonio is basically set up to lose representation, right? As gerrymandered as these districts are, you know, we're basically getting to a position where there's like 4, and then like, you know, how much is it even really for? I mean, look, we have a part that goes through San Antonio and goes all the way, you know, larger than most of the states that y'all are watching, goes all the way to El Paso, which is, you know, 6-7 hour drive.
All those guys have a very personal relationship with their representative, I'm sure.
Yes.
Flying through there at 80 miles an hour.
The Austin area, which, as we were just looking at earlier, has that kind of bizarre Greg Casar district that goes all the way down to San Antonio. It also has Lloyd Doggett, who's my representative, who's in this kind of South Austin area. And then you got Chip Roy and a bunch of other people who Republican, you know, who have these kind of staggered districts. What this new district plan would do would basically eradicate, you know, the Democrat seats, except for one super seat that would probably be Greg Casar's. As you see here, this is not a reasonable, this is a political constituency that apparently you can walk over, because if you see on the left side is that green, that's not a mistake. They weren't lazy here. It's because that district goes all the way out far off into East Texas. And you see, you have to really zoom in here to see, which looks like, I mean, you, there's literally a short road that you would walk over, you know, so they had to carve out to gerrymander this district. I mean, anyone with a brain can see how absurd this is. Houston is just a fucking mess, as is Dallas. So this is absurd on its face, and you know, you have to oppose it because this is an attempt, as we talked about earlier. The numbers that they're trying to get here is to make it so that 85% of seats in Texas are Republicans, despite the fact that that is nowhere near reflective of what the what the partisan makeup of the state is.
Just can't wait till we have. It's just, yeah, I don't know. We have more beautiful districts to look at.
I know, it's very exciting. I love the idea of a walking tour. I should go up and walk across the proposed District 10.
You could do it. Yeah, like it'd be like a 45-second video of you walking across the.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that.
Finished part of it.
All right, folks, we're gonna go over the post game. You're watching, you want to get that? Go over to patreon.com/leftreckoning. If you're already over there on the YouTube, we'll be going in just a second. We have you know, a lot of really exciting things going on. Matt and I are going to be covering the DSA convention, so follow us on Twitter, David Griscom and at Matt Leck, to get some updates about what's going on there. We're very excited. It's going to be a big convention. It's very important, and we got much more next week. We got Seth Harp as well. But again, fun's not over. Matt and I are going to go over to the post game, so you can get access to that patreon.com/leftreckoning. It's going to go dark here for our Twitch viewers and our free YouTube heads, but for our patrons, the lights never go out, friends. So come and hang out with us.